Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday morning, which has become a little bit kind of a ritual of sorts this offseason. Don't look to make this a standard thing every Friday, but it worked out this way this week. Off season is what it is. And like I said earlier, a few weeks ago, Flyover will be here anytime we have news to break or discuss or current events going on in Major League Soccer. And this is one of those episodes where we have what I would kind of think of as a turning of the page kind of a show. We will look at the city end of year presser. We will talk some long term MLS rumblings that some news has been, I would say reports have been released about the future of Major League Soccer. And then, of course, the big news this week is that the schedule was released for 2026. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this Friday. If you're joining live, if you're joining afterwards, then just remember this is a Friday morning episode. So, things are a little fun, a little loose, and there's a lot to get to. And I don't think this will be a very long, elongated episode, but we'll get to what we need to. And if you're joining us live, drop some comments in the chat. Can't wait to see what you all think about this schedule because now in year 4 for St. Louis City, it's one of those schedules that isn't exactly the most exciting at face value. So it'll be fun to kind of dig into that. Even though it's obviously exciting for a new season set of matches, a new team that we'll get to play this season, new venues that we'll get to go to, so new opportunities for away games. But there are some drawbacks to this one, and part of it is a byproduct of this year that's going to be in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, with the World Cup coming and what that means for MLS and what they're doing to the schedule. But it's also kind of a getting us moving towards 27, 28 in the whole schedule shift. We'll break all of that down. So settle in and we'll get going here with the pod recording. And if you have if you need an extra cup of coffee, feel free to go grab one for a second because we're going to dive into it all. Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining us on another off-season episode of Flyover, what will likely be the last episode of Flyover Footy before the Thanksgiving holiday. You never know what might happen, who might be hired, who might be signed, what news might break. So I don't want to promise that this is the final episode before Thanksgiving, but in all likelihood, unless something major happens in the days leading up to the Thanksgiving holiday, this is it for us. So I appreciate you joining us on this episode. On this episode of Flyover Footy, we will be looking at the end of year press conference that St. Louis City held on Wednesday of this week. We'll be looking at some reports of the way Major League Soccer might be moving to in a leadership capacity. And then, of course, the big news, the big focus on this episode is the schedule release that dropped on Thursday, November 20th. In advance of what we were expecting, or what we were used to rather, in the December release of this. But 2026 is an interesting year in not just MLS, but in the global soccer landscape with the World Cup year, World Cup being hosted here. So it makes sense for MLS to release this early because everything else is kind of going to happen a little earlier. Training camp's probably starting a week or so earlier in January. The season is starting at least a week earlier. And we can kind of see the beginnings of the shift towards what will end up being the schedule in 27, 28 as they move to the summer spring schedule. But you get an idea of what this episode will be. Let's dive right into it. Looking at St. Louis City first, because we got plenty of MLS to talk about here shortly. Let's look at St. Louis City. And as this is what I would think of as a turning of the page moment, where we've done our season in review show on Flyover. We've done our player options, our roster reviews, looking at all of that. We talked about Corey Ray on a couple different episodes in the new sporting director role and what that means for this coming off season. The last thing that St. Louis really had to do for the 2025 season is the end of year presser, the press conference where they make their head coach, some of the players available. And this is one of those that it took a while for it to actually happen. The season ended a month or so ago, and we're just now getting to hear from the players. The reasoning is fairly obvious at this point in time. For a little bit, we were wondering, but like I said a couple weeks ago, the clarity has arrived. So the reasoning for the end of year press conference waiting so long is St. Louis City held 4 weeks of postseason training. David Critchley addressed this a couple different times on what they hope to accomplish, what the point of postseason training was. We talked about it before, so in case you missed those episodes, kind of the idea of postseason training had nothing to do with the sporting director. It had nothing to do with letting the sporting director see some of the players, get an idea for their vision, even a tryout of sorts for the sporting director. None of that. And as I told Phil and Stu and Santi in our DMs, it kind of ended up being the most obvious. And so it really was a case of the simplest answer is the correct answer. And that was that City didn't want to have an 11, 12 week absence, a layoff for their team leading into the 2026 season. They had done this before with obviously results that we saw in 2025. Player feedback from the end of 2025 is that was too long of a break. They've seen other teams like Nashville, Chicago, and other Major League Soccer teams have a postseason training if they weren't a part of the playoffs. And so there was data behind this. There were reasonings behind this purely from a player perspective on what the team wanted to accomplish in not just keeping the fitness and having kind of a ramp down from the season, but also the end of the season. The last 5 or 6 games for St. Louis were obviously better than the previous few weeks, few months, and the beginning of the season was. So keeping that momentum into the offseason for those players who were able to stay and able to have this opportunity together. Critchley said on the purpose of postseason training, it was culture building and behavior building on the field. He had 3 mantras that he kind of talked about when it came to his on the field. And it was it really all related to the culture building. He said that the mantras were spread joy and laughter, be proactive, not reactive, and no whining and complaining. So not a lot of tactical work, not a lot of getting everybody new information or things that they're working on these 11v11s all of the time in preparation for something immediately upcoming. You had a little bit of that, I would say, leisure aspect to it, where you're not under the gun, under the need to prep for an upcoming weekend match. So on the field, it was behavior building. It was trying to make sure that they were reinforcing all of the things that they had worked to and that Critchley was instilling on the team. But off the field, there was a lot of that culture building. There was team activities. David Critchley talked about boxing, pickleball, motivational speaker sessions, trying to make sure that they didn't make the same mistakes as before with this layoff, but that it wasn't just focused on the field. It was team building, where it was kind of the opposite of a preseason camp, of a training camp. And it was this after the fact, you had guys local in St. Louis, but they were able to focus on each other, focus on growing as a team. So yes, they worked on fitness, the team building activities, but these behaviors, Critchley said, a big emphasis was on quicker ball movement, saying, quote, if I'm in this chair next season, we'll be one of the fastest teams in the country in moving the ball. So things that David Critchley wants these players to be able to take forward into 2026, big deals as far as what they were trying to become acclimated on ball movement, positioning, with who they had available, because not everybody was here. Klaus, for instance, wasn't here. David Critchley noted that Klaus had an excused absence that he and the club had talked about earlier in the season for their postseason training. Nothing too noteworthy, and we talked about it before that Klaus wasn't a part of this. Critchley downplayed that as nothing, and obviously Klaus's option was picked up, so he will be here next season as well. David Critchley also mentioned that he has met with the new sporting director, Corey Ray, and Critchley said they talked about the process that the club has in place for the head coaching search. Critchley said he respects the process while he goes about leading the club during this training. So not a whole lot of information that Critchley was able to share on his meeting with Corey Ray, other than Critchley is aware that the process that Corey Ray and the sporting side are working through in this search for a head coach. Last big thing David Critchley talked about to me was some of the players stepping up in leadership roles. We know that Roman Berkey is coming back as the team captain. We know that Marcel Hartl is coming back as the team's vice captain. But Critchley specifically cited guys like Thomas Totland, Simon Betcher, and Chris Durkin. Totland, who has a year, Totland, actually all 3 of them are under contract still for next year, and talked about their leadership in what they were doing, stepping up during this 4-week postseason training, and how good it was to see that, to see these these players and more, but specifically citing Totland, Betcher, and Durkin as taking leadership roles. So as St. Louis looks to, I think, turn the page from this season, getting guys more vocal, having more leadership capabilities from a spread of outfield players on the field and in sub roles, that's going to be important. And it was the thing that we talked about last week when it comes to Josh Yarrow, as the reason wasn't his on the field work. The reason seems to be his leadership that he offers the team. One other note really quick on Josh Yarrow that we didn't address last week, but it was reported in the Post-Dispatch after our episode last week that based on the negotiation and the timeline, it's possible, and it wasn't reported this is the case, but they called out the fact that because Yarrow's contract option was not picked up, and he was out of contract, they renegotiated it. So the fact that he was making a little over $200,000 last year might not be the case next season. And in fact, it's reported that St. Louis may have sought to sign Josh Yarrow to a senior minimum contract, which would allow him to be placed on the supplemental roster. And yes, the concerns of that of his overall ability to impact the team positively on the field are still there, but they're mitigated a little bit if the fact that he's signed to a senior minimum contract on the supplemental roster and it doesn't take up a senior roster slot for Josh Yarrow. Wanted to add that in, has absolutely nothing to do with the postseason training, but in the concept of all the players in the leadership roles coming back, thought it was a nice little segue to be including in there. Now, of the players that we heard in the postseason training or the post-season press conference, we heard from Roman Berkey, Marcel Hartl, Chris Durkin, Simon Betcher, Cedric Toyshirt, Falufal, and Songbin Jong. For the full video on this, go check out City's YouTube page. They have the entire presser up so you can see the player reactions, the emotions they had on their faces, all those things that they had with the questions that were asked of them. Some big themes from all of these players were how good it was for the team building to have this postseason training, this 4 weeks, how good it was to be able to focus on some of the smaller things with the staff, with each other, without the rigors and pressures of a match coming the next weekend. All were glowing of David Critchley, and a few like Simon Betcher noted that this was their first preseason training like this. So it was a new and unique experience for pretty much everyone here. Some of the individual comments that I found noteworthy: Roman Berkey discussed his contract status by saying that he had very good conversations with the club and everybody was happy with the decision that was made in those negotiations. Berkey said, quote, "I never tried to put myself in a position where I could hurt the team. End of the day, they made me an offer and I accepted." And I think this is slightly noteworthy in the fact that Roman Berkey is a player on this team. Roman Berkey is not responsible for roster building. Roman Berkey is responsible for doing his best for the club and getting the most out of his value. And I think it's obvious that he did that in this sense. And the club obviously was, at least from a Diego and Hackworth perspective, before Corey Ray arrived, happy with signing Roman Berkey to a designated player deal. I do agree. I saw some comments on Twitter and Blue Sky, and I do agree that there's nothing about Roman Berkey's deal that you can blame Roman Berkey for. Roman Berkey got what value he thought he was worth and remained at a place that he wanted to play in. And so going forward, the onus is going to be on Corey Ray and the sporting department to now make the most of the roster with Berkey in one of those DP spots. Now, on Berkey's relationship with the front office, Berkey said, and I found this noteworthy because of the comments that Berkey made in his contract announcement, where he talked about the front office had showed him the plan. They talked about what they wanted to be doing in the future. And so including Roman Berkey a little bit in the front office negotiations or contracts or discussions on where the team was going as part of their negotiations was fairly noteworthy. And Berkey said to me that with Lutz, they would talk often. He'd ask Roman thoughts and advice on different aspects. So it was obviously a close relationship that Roman Berkey had with Lutz Pfannenstiel. But with Corey Ray, he's just getting to know him. So it'll be up to Corey, as Roman said, on how involved Roman is in those front office conversations. Taylor Twellman had a comment on Twitter that Berkey's a player, should be staying out of front office conversations. And so this may be something that Berkey's comments and references to Lutz may be overblown as far as whether Berkey has any say in front office decisions. This was probably more conversation of a couple friends with the experience Berkey has and advice and discussions in that front. Obviously would not expect Roman Berkey to be having conversations with Corey Ray about who they should and should not sign. That's a decision up to Corey Ray. Berkey also said that in his leadership capacity, the way he led obviously didn't work the last couple of years. So there's things that he's learned, things that he's taking into next season on how to be the leader that this team needs. And Marcel Hartl also talked after Berkey about his leadership, saying he's learned to be more vocal, to prepare himself in the offseason to be a role model and to always be available for guys when they're struggling or need something, maybe go out for coffee or just talk it out off the field. The leadership style and capability of both these players is going to be huge going into next season. What they've learned over the past couple of years in not just the struggles and the issues that the team has had on the field, but their ability to change the tone, to make sure that the locker room doesn't devolve into anything, to always keep a positive eye on things, and to keep players moving forward in a good direction. That's huge when you're going through these kinds of struggles. And so to know and to hear that they've learned certain things and they're adjusting or changing their styles going into 2026, it's one of those intangible things that it's not going to ever get really the notoriety or the coverage that maybe it could, but it's good to know that these leaders on this team are taking things into next year that they've learned in adjusting their leadership styles. The schedule change was hugely mentioned on multiple fronts. Berkey expressed excitement at the MLS scheduling change. He's mentioned it multiple times that he wants to see the league going into a fall to spring type schedule. And he said during this postseason press conference that he's excited. It's something he's long been in favor of, noted it is, quote, a very important step for the league. And Marcel Hartl echoed this, also say he was glowing about the upcoming change being very good for the whole league. Hartl referenced the ability to sign players in the summer that are out of contract, get them get them into games more quickly and impact the entire season as opposed to just the last 10 games or so. So obviously these players from Europe are very excited about this change in the schedule coming in 2027. Berkey and all the other players were very positive about the postseason training. They all noted the team building activities, pickleball, boxing, other activities that allowed them to grow together, get to know each other better. And Berkey was especially complimentary about the team overall. In this shows his leadership, complimentary about the team and how they handled it, the postseason training, and how serious everyone was about it when they were on the field. Marcel Hartl and Simon Betcher, in talking about next season, Marcel Hartl said that for next season, the team really needs a good preseason first and foremost. This was Hartl's first full year. He's learned so much about preparing himself, the length of a season, and what it takes to be ready and to stay at that level for an entire year. Simon Betcher also echoed that they need to have a strong preseason compared to what they had this past year. And so that if you can't take what you've had in this postseason training and translate it to a preseason, then it kind of diminishes the whole worthwhileness of the postseason training. So it's on the players now to come back and carry this momentum forward that they built. Chris Durkin said that for 2026 to be different, he noted that he started both seasons off well under Bradley Carnell and Olaf Melberg, but it's that almost a third of the way through the season, or where they've hit roadblocks both years, the past couple of years, Durkin said maybe they've become content and noted that Energizer Park needs to be a fortress that they have to get back to. And on a couple individual player fronts, Chris Durkin had some revealing words, I thought, for the scope of his injury-laden season in 2025, discussing injury setbacks, MCL injury that should have been 6 to 8 weeks, but turned into 17 weeks, it felt like. The patella injury to start the year in preseason, where he didn't get a good preseason himself, and always feeling like he was playing catch-up. There was a lesson learned on relying on those around him, how to manage training sessions. But Durkin did say, and this is important, that this is the first offseason in a while that he's going into fully healthy and to get back to the level he knows he should be at. Now, on the opposite end of this, you had Cedric Teuchert. Cedric Teuchert had interesting comments that I think reveal what we can expect from him in 2026 to start, where Durkin noted that he was completely healthy now, excited to go into offseason totally healthy and get back to his peak form. Cedric Teuchert did comment that he wasn't on the field at all during the postseason training. Still hasn't gotten to that point yet. He called this his worst professional season, saying, quote, "The biggest point for me is to get healthy, to get back into my form, to go on the field without pain. Right now, I'm good. I'm not on a point to train with the team. I need a little bit more time. I hope for preseason that I'm back with the team." And this is where the aligning expectations are going to be. So we have Teuchert on the roster. Yes. He's under contract until June 2026. Yes. We also remember Chris Durkin coming into 2025 in that central midfield role that Alfredo Morales was signed to because Durkin's injury persisted. Could this be something similar where Teuchert, the team knows he's not going to be 100% going into preseason, or likely not going to be 100% going into preseason? Does that change who they want to target as far as a potential signing that can take over for Teuchert in that role where he was obviously signed with the TAM deal to be a big difference maker. And if they're not going to have that player at 100% to start, would it be worthwhile to find someone that you can put in that role to enhance your striker core, your attacking midfielders, without Toyshirt maybe starting the season off 100%? Simon Betcher, going back to him, he noted a lot of growth related to his positioning and what was asked of him. Always talking to David Critchley, always working with the staff on where he can be best used at. And some of those conversations seem like they might have been difficult to have just because Klaus was in form much more so in 2025, and you can't really take Klaus off the field in that role. And with Critchley going to a 4-2-3-1, Betcher's conversations about where he was best suited on the field, making a push for him to be more central where he's best suited, where he feels he's best suited, reiterating that a lot to Critchley, but needing to play out wide. It seemed like a push-pull battle for Simon Betcher, and you wonder how much of that playing out of his ideal position impacted his overall goal scoring in 2025. So it'll be interesting to see where Simon Betcher goes in 26 and what role he plays for City and where on the field based on what we saw in 2025. Last couple things, Songbin Jong's made comments were just needing to score and assist more, be productive for the team next season. And Falou Fall ended the presser by talking about how easy it was to hit the ground running because the organization was so welcoming and accommodating, and referring to the team as a family after this postseason training, which is obviously a great thing to hear from your 21-year-old U22 player who you have a lot of vision and excitement for the upcoming season. Let's now pivot a little bit to news across Major League Soccer. And I want to start by looking at not the schedule yet, but the other big news. And if you're joining us on our live stream, I'm going to show the article from the Sports Business Journal. And I will obviously talk about it if you're not watching live on YouTube or on our stream. But it was announced here recently that Major League Soccer owners held their first succession committee meeting for senior leadership, including Don Garber. Garber has not indicated whether he expects to remain beyond his current contract that expires at the end of the 2027 season, which would now fall in the middle of the 27-28 season following the new schedule change. But a small group of MLS owners held their first closed-door succession committee meeting last Wednesday prior to Thursday's full Board of Governors meeting where they made the schedule change. And other members in the committee chaired by LAFC's Bennett Rosenthal and the Columbus Crew's Jimmy Haslam, other owners in this conversation were owners of the New England Revolution, the New York Red Bulls, and Nashville SC. It was also reported that Don Garber himself attended this meeting. The small group made a brief presentation to the full board during the executive session last Thursday, again, that one where the schedule was voted on. And it looks like the succession committee's first meeting came just one day after MLS Deputy Commissioner Gary Stevenson announced his own plans to retire. So a couple of the top guys in Major League Soccer are either leaving, Stevenson after next summer's FIFA World Cup, or are on the way out. And Garber referenced MLS 3.0 pretty heavily, so did Stevenson, over the past few weeks in their comments, where in this article, Gary Stevenson, that MLS deputy commissioner, said, in the next 8 months, we're going to be putting the finishing touches on MLS 3.0 so that once I leave, and I think once Garber leaves, it'll be in a place that next group can take it and evolve it. And if you think of who the league might be looking at to take over for Don Garber, well, the Sports Business Journal looked at potential candidates to be the next commissioner, looking across the North American landscape, including MLS, and based on interviews with industry insiders, some names that they say could garner consideration include Charles Altchek, the Executive Vice President of Club Performance and League Growth in MLS, JT Batson, the CEO of US Soccer, Dan Beckerman, the President and CEO of AEG, which I believe own the LA Galaxy, Larry Berg, co-managing owner of LAFC, Ivan Gazadis, president of Kilmer Sports Ventures, Dan Helfrich, principal, Deloitte Consulting, Peter O'Reilly, the executive vice president of club business and international league events in the NFL, Christian Seifert, a former CEO in the Bundesliga, Anastasia Danis Schmidt, executive vice president and chief legal officer in Major League Soccer, and Mark Tatum, deputy commissioner in the NBA. Garber has been commissioner of Major League Soccer since 1999. Arguably MLS 1.5 or so, when a 4-year-old league was fledgling. You had issues with solvency for some of the teams, and he took it, and I don't think it's arguable to say he has grown it considerably. Maybe not at the pace and the direction with which a lot of fans want to see it grown, but I don't think it's arguable that since Garber took over as commissioner in 1999, the growth of MLS has definitely taken on a new trajectory and has succeeded in a lot of ways where you're no longer, at the very least, talking about clubs potentially folding. Garber himself has a lot of, I would say, detractors, to put it mildly, but it'll be interesting to see the conversation over the next couple of months, next year, as MLS is now borderline officially or unofficially, based on reports, looking at their succession planning for leadership of their organization. Now let's flip over to probably the thing everybody is tuning into this episode for, which is the MLS schedule release. There were a host of things put out on Thursday and took a lot of people by surprise in some ways, because we're used to the schedule being released in December. We're still in the middle of the playoffs, getting ready to resume the playoffs in the quarterfinals after this international break, and MLS just dropped their schedule. I think dropping the schedule is an indication of just how different next year will be in a lot of ways, from when they open the season on the 21st, 22nd of February to the couple month break that they're going to have for the World Cup, and then finishing a little later in the season where our final match and decision day is going to be in November. So let's look a little bit at some of the comments that Major League Soccer had, some key dates, some things that City said, and we'll dive into some of my thoughts as well. Major League Soccer, in their release, unveiled the dates of MLS is back as February 21st and 22nd. They noted that Inter Miami will open their new stadium, Miami Freedom Park, on April 4th. There will be a World Cup pause from May 25th through July 16th. So no Major League Soccer matches from May 25th through July 16th. And MLS action returns on that July 16th, 17th date, the Wednesday, Thursday, in the lead up to the World Cup final. That's a big thing to note, is that MLS is returning to play after this break the couple of days prior to the third place match and the World Cup final weekend. The MLS All-Star game will be on July 29th. So just a couple, 10 days or so, a couple weeks after MLS returns. And then decision day will be on November 7th. MLS also made sure to include that MLS Season Pass has gone away and that fans can watch every regular season match with an Apple TV subscription. Apple will be broadcasting all of these matches, including a return of Sunday Night Soccer, with Fox Sports airing 34 MLS games in 2026, including 15 matches on Fox and 19 on FS1, some of which St. Louis will be a part of. Now, in their announcement for this, St. Louis City made some specific notes for our club. So let's go over those really quick. St. Louis will have their home opener against Charlotte FC on February 21st, a Saturday at 1:30 p.m. St. Louis will have 3 nationally televised Sunday Night Soccer games and the club's first 2 trips to New York to face both NYCFC and the New York Red Bulls. The Red Bulls are obviously the only team City has not played in the regular season since joining in 2023. This season, City noted that the break for the World Cup will occur, the 1:30 start time for Charlotte. The club has an early stretch against 3 of the Western Conference's top 5 teams from 2025, so it will be a difficult stretch to open the season. San Diego FC in that second game, and then you have matches against Seattle and LAFC. After hosting New England, City goes out on a 3-match road trip early in the season to NYCFC, FC Dallas, and Seattle. And then City's last match prior to the World Cup break will be against Austin at home, which is nice. We'll get to have a nice home match prior to this extended break on May 23rd. The team's first match after MLS returns will be that Thursday, July 16th matchup at home against Sporting KC 3 days before the World Cup final. That's some of the, I would say, positives, some of the glass half full approaches to this schedule. There are more than a few potential issues or frustrations from fans. So let's dive into some additional thoughts that I have. Overall, there's more midweek matches. St. Louis, there are 23 Saturday, 6 Wednesday, 4 Sunday, and 1 Thursday match for St. Louis this in 2026. There's no two ways to say it. The rivalry aspect of this season sucks. It's subpar for fans across the board. You can look at it glass half full by saying that the Sporting KC game at Energizer Park, the one in St. Louis of the season, because we play them twice, the one in St. Louis on July 16th is part of this group of rivalry games that the league is scheduled in the days before the World Cup final. You seem likely to want to show enthusiasm for the World Cup final, continue to build off of the international matches that have occurred in the U.S. They've got matches like St. Louis, Kansas City, Montreal, Toronto, Seattle, Portland, Nashville, Atlanta, and El Tráfico, all as midweek matches in the lead up to the World Cup final. And so this is awesome, right? In theory, you're building excitement for your teams. You're building excitement for the league as you get back into action, and you're trying to build off of that excitement that fans have for watching soccer in the U.S. And that's great from a macro perspective, from an outside looking in, the big picture kind of a thing. Sounds great. But in typical MLS fashion, what sounds great from a macro level is awful for fans on the ground. The boots on the ground aspect of this is terrible, where you're wanting, and especially for St. Louis, you're wanting to have rivalry matches that facilitate travel. You're wanting to have rivalry matches that facilitate fan engagement across both sides. The short nature, the geographic nature of rivalries from St. Louis, Kansas City, Seattle, Portland, Nashville, Atlanta, El Trafico, Montreal, Toronto, they facilitate fan travel. And that's how rivalry matches should be. These actual games where it makes it easier for you to go see your team play in your rival stadium. Thursday matches aren't it. And for MLS to prioritize that over anything else is a little condescending to fans and more frustrating, but also in alignment to what you see Major League Soccer do all the time. This is the frustration the fans had on MLS Season Pass in general, where, yeah, you give MLS Season Pass to your season ticket holders for free, but everybody else has to buy this separate package to watch your team. It doesn't build the fan base. It doesn't build the excitement. This is yet another, I think, misstep on the micro level when you get boots on the ground for the fan bases. No matter how much you're saying, okay, it could make sense to build excitement across the national board, but I'm sorry, as much as I love St. Louis City, I don't think anybody from Idaho or Montana is going to be tuning into St. Louis, Kansas City just because they're excited for soccer after the World Cup and leading up into the World Cup final. So that's where I struggle to have a whole lot of excitement on this one. The other aspect of this is that the other rivalry match against SKC is on a Wednesday. That just doesn't make sense in a lot of different ways. And I'm going to show the schedule on the screen so you can look at this while I'm talking through it for the live stream. But having the SKC match in Kansas be August 19th at 7:00, just if you're going to have one rivalry match midweek because you're doing this World Cup final push for excitement, you almost have an obligation to the fans to make the other one on weekend. And for MLS to not do this overall and I don't think St. Louis is the only team, but I know obviously St. Louis is the one that we're mostly impacted by. It's borderline unexcusable. And it's just a slap in the face to a lot of the fan base to do this for both matches in the rivalry in 2026. This is a big reason why this schedule release falls flat for a lot of fans, where there are other exciting things. There are plenty of matchups that we're excited about, getting to play Red Bulls, for instance, the last schedule that's going to occur without the single table, for instance, and the divisions once the 2027-2028 season gets started. And then the one in 2027 to start the season is going to be a condensed 14 gamer. So this is the last full season schedule like this. And it's unfortunate for it to happen in this way. And also, it doesn't have a match against the Chicago Fire. This is my other big thing. Nashville doesn't have a match against Nashville either. So St. Louis isn't playing either of their other geographic rivals in the Eastern Conference. But to have no SKC games on the weekend, to have no match against the Chicago Fire, first time that's happened. This is the first season without a regular season match against the Chicago Fire, and to have no match against Nashville. St. Louis fans, as far as travel goes, you're looking at this awful, awful season of travel from a day of the week perspective and from a distance traveled. And I've got this chart that our friend Billy at Hellbender STL on Twitter put out, and it's really difficult to read, but go check him out on Twitter. The distance traveled by St. Louis this season is horrendous. We're talking thousands of miles back to back to back in some parts of the season. And you could juxtapose it by saying this is a big country, big league, but you have no matches of those near in close proximity to the teams that are capable of. And that's a huge scheduling miss. And I just am really frustrated by that as a fan who likes to travel first and foremost. But also I like to have fans travel to us to build some of those rivalries. So some other notes that I have after that diatribe are that City has only 6 home games before the World Cup from February to May. So you look at Charlotte at home, you have Seattle, New England, San Jose, LAFC, and Austin FC as 6 home games from a February to May timeframe. And then you look on the back half of the schedule and you see 11 home games from July to October after the World Cup. So I am worried if St. Louis doesn't have the momentum that they want to have in the back half of the season. If they have another season like this year, like last year, how that will be in the back half of the season. You're not front loading your schedule. You're putting a lot of onus on the team being successful early on to have that excitement built for these 11 home matches from July to October, which is just a really backloaded schedule. And it's not like St. Louis is unique on this. I saw Charlotte's get put out there, and Charlotte has these 5-game stretches where they have home or away matches. If you talk about a balanced schedule, this in a lot of ways seems absolutely not that. It's almost like MLS took the priorities that they wanted to have of a World Cup break and starting the season in February and ending it around October, November, and said, all right, it doesn't matter the consistency. It doesn't matter the balance. We just need to fit these games in. And there are some positives to this as far as trying to fit that in. The schedule itself goes from what I think was 39 match days last year to 35 match days scheduled this year. More midweek matches, but it is condensed. And there's only one FIFA international window that I saw that MLS will be playing through this year. So it's obviously down from 2025. So that's a benefit to this. The FIFA window is in September, where MLS has matches on the 26th and 27th. And the window for that break goes from the 21st of September to October 6th. So that's a good aspect of this, as MLS is starting their shift to the break in the summer, the break in the winter. Decision day also, if we're talking positives here, decision day appears to be an afternoon, evening slate of matches. The Eastern Conference games seem to be kicking off at 3, and the Western Conference seem to be kicking off at 6. The break for the FIFA international window will be after this. So unlike today, where you're having a round of playoff matches, you're having a 2-week break and then continuing the playoffs, this 2026 schedule takes care of that as well, where your FIFA international window will be after decision day. Still not ideal for building excitement to the playoffs, and I'm sure we'll be frustrated, assuming we make the playoffs, with that layoff. But at least once you get to the playoffs, you have consistency and you can carry it forward, and you can let the presumed best of 3 first-round match build the excitement immediately to the rest of the playoffs. MLS All-Star Game I mentioned is July 29th, and then the Halloween date is the last noteworthy thing to me. The one unknown on the schedule is Halloween, where it's TBD on the start time. We've seen other clubs put out, I think San Diego has put out, who we're facing at home in St. Louis on Halloween. They put out a 5:30 local start time in San Diego, which would be 7:30 for St. Louis. And I just have to say, if MLS makes Halloween night matches where it's 6, 7, 8 o'clock, it would both be on brand for their lack of concern for local fans going to the stadium, but it would also be one of the worst possible decisions that they could make, which should be a slam dunk. This is a date that has obvious family implications for trick-or-treating, and you start it around 5, you go till 7, 8, whatever. It's an easy win to have a slate of afternoon matches. Have your East Coast matches kick off at noon Eastern, for instance, and then maybe have noon to 3 o'clock as your kickoff times. Get your fans the ability to go enjoy the game, come back home, have their activities. It won't take away from the excitement of the match. And it's not the last match of the season. It's so you're not making this the final show. You have the flexibility to be able to move around this. It would be insane to have traditional nighttime kickoffs for Major League Soccer in this capacity. Let me go over to the chat. Let's see what you guys are saying on the schedule. Aaron says, I actually don't mind the schedule outside of Kansas matches being much more difficult. At least we have it far enough in advance to start planning. Definitely agree there. I've looked at some away matches like LA Galaxy, DC United, in and around the World Cup break. We're trying to align it with some other things like Cardinals baseball or other local matches to have kind of a fun weekend in that regard. So at least we do have this early to start planning, and you can kind of maybe book your 2026 travel around when you're home for the holidays as it is. Aaron added a lot of home matches in the second half. Could be huge, especially if we add some summer transfer help and have a stretch for them to help. I agree with that. Daniel Gavura, I like Critch, but if he was getting the job, why not already announce it? Well, Corey Ray hasn't really had time to go through everything. This is going to be a Corey Ray driven decision. So this is in the same vein of why it didn't club announce a sporting director right after the season. They don't need to. the players are on break at this point. They've left for their off season. There's no need and urgency to sign a coach right now. So I'm not worried because Critchley or anybody else hasn't been signed necessarily. Hate that we don't have close away game road trips. No Columbus, Cincy, Nashville, Minnesota away is going to be rough in October. The big thing that that's noted here that I didn't initially clock because I wasn't expecting it necessarily is no Inter Miami on the schedule. Messi has been re-signed, obviously, so the Miami away games are going to continue to be a feature, and no Messi traveling to St. Louis is a bummer. It's not expected though, because under this current schedule, the Eastern Conference matches that we play, I mean, Chicago is kind of an indication. We don't play Eastern Conference teams home and away every single year. We miss a handful at least of those cross-conference games every single year. This year, it's pretty egregious in the sense of it's the hopeful Midwest division that we're just not playing next season. And maybe that's a reason why is you're taking a year off from Chicago, Nashville, Columbus and Cincy, maybe because they're going to be our division rivals going forward in this single table, having divisions for the schedule. If I go back to my map that I showed last week, if you look at where I have us projected, the 3 Eastern Conference teams of today, Chicago, Cincinnati, and Columbus, they're not on our schedule at all. So by giving us the opportunity to play some of these other teams, in 2026 and then moving to this, it could be an indication. I haven't looked at the other teams to see if that's even a trend at all yet, but it was the first thing that came into my mind when those teams weren't on our schedule at all. The other thing for our schedule really quick before I go back to the questions from the chat is this MLS calendar switch and the schedule release in 2026. Ben Wright put out a fantastic graph that compares how the old and new calendar formats will overlap. So the current spring to fall format, or the current spring to fall format that goes from February to end of October, beginning of November, with this break for the World Cup. If you look at the 2026 schedule with the break in the World Cup, as he reported, 85% of matches line up to what we will have from 27 to 28 and beyond to what we're going to have in 2026. 84 is the number Ben put out. So because of the World Cup break, that's why I'm referencing this as like a soft launch to the new schedule. Yes, it's spring to fall and the season begins in the spring, but that's the biggest change. It's not overall the months. And so you have like 6 weeks, 6 matches or so that you'll need to finagle at different parts of the year. And the biggest change obviously is going from less summer matches to more winter matches as you extend into the middle of December. But that's how the schedule will be maintained, is probably additional away matches in those parts of the year, November to December, for teams like Minnesota, Toronto, and Montreal. Going back to the chat for just a moment as we finish this up, Leagues Cup was not mentioned at all. No mention of Leagues Cup. I don't think this is any indictment against Leagues Cup. I would be shocked if they took a break from this because of how much of a focus they are putting on it. This is going to be something to watch for, though, because it will have to be a midweek tournament. It'll be an FA Cup. It'll be a Leagues Cup type of thing, as far as or Caribou Cup, rather, type of a thing when it comes to comparing elsewhere. They've got these midweeks. So watching how that develops will be interesting. They didn't do a month-long break, and they didn't announce it in 2025 as well when they did that schedule announce. So that's why I'm not making a massive note of it yet. Hopefully no Leagues Cup and World Cup year, and then dead after is the comment in the chat from Greg Halvex. I can share that. I mean, we haven't been involved in Leagues Cup, and we won't be involved in Leagues Cup. The other reason I think it's going to happen, but they haven't announced it yet, is because they've alluded to this already. Year and a half ago, when MLS announced the US Open Cup and Leagues Cup plans, as far as including more quote unquote MLS teams in the US Open Cup at the time, they created that strategy where basically the top half of the table will play in Leagues Cup and the bottom few teams will play in US Open Cup from the standings the year before. That plan was for 2025 and 2026. Now, after 2026, when this schedule change happens, I think that's another synergistic thing of this that MLS is going towards, where they knew they were working towards this potential schedule change. They announced very specifically that Leagues Cup would be happening in the years before. So if I were a betting man, I would say Leagues Cup still will happen. They are not going to just scrap that plan, but it will cause a lot of fixture congestion because of the World Cup timeframe. When will MLS do the All-Star game? When will they switch the calendar schedule in 2027? St. Louis probably hosts the first All-Star game after the switch. I need to look back on the schedule for the All-Star games. I think Austin had it recently. Charlotte will have it in 2026. I'm not sure if Cincinnati has had it since they've built their new stadium. And then Nashville is the other team, I think. But as long as we get it before Miami Freedom Park, I'll be happy. So it could be 27. It could be 28. We also don't know the time frame for the All-Star game once they do the schedule change. So they could do it in, I would hope not December, because that would preclude some teams like us probably from having a worthwhile All-Star game. It could be after the season. It could be a friendly right after the season. So, I mean, if you're a fan of the All-Star game, that could be interesting. And it's an interesting time frame for it to happen, knowing St. Louis is on deck either for 27 or 28 to get the All-Star game. MLS will switch the calendar. So 2027, just a reminder, after this 26 season will wrap in November for the regular season, December for the playoffs and MLS Cup. MLS will have a condensed 14-game sprint season to start the calendar year 2027 in February. That sprint season goes until May, and then they will shift over to the new schedule. The new schedule will start in July 2027. Last thing I really want to talk about is, well, I mentioned flyovers probably not going to be airing on Thanksgiving. Right now, St. Louis, or right now, rather, we've got the Thanksgiving holiday on tap, so I'm not expecting a whole lot of news. In the big picture, MLS is resuming MLS Cup playoffs with the quarterfinal matchups this weekend. So if you're a fan of soccer, you get to watch Vancouver against LAFC on Saturday, Cincinnati against Inter Miami on Sunday, and Philadelphia Union against NYCFC on Sunday as well, with San Diego FC and Minnesota United playing on Monday. And then just before we go, the last thing I want to wrap up this episode of Flyover with is a special congratulations to our collegiate teams in the St. Louis area. Men's soccer teams from St. Louis, 4 of them have qualified for the NCAA tournaments, and 3 of them are still in the tournament. At the D1 level, we have St. Louis University and Lindenwood. At the D2 level, we have Maryville. And at the D3 level, we have Wash U. As I record this, SLU defeated Kentucky 2-1 on Thursday night to move on to the second round of the NCAA Division I tournament. They will play Indiana at home on Sunday, November 23rd, while Lindenwood fell to UMKC, or I think they might just call them KC now, on Thursday, 1-0. So Lindenwood is out of the D1 tournament. And Maryville plays Rockhurst away in the second round of the NCAA Division II tournament on Sunday, November 23rd at 3 p.m. The last match, the last one to discuss really is Wash U. Wash U plays Trinity from Texas on Saturday at 1:30 p.m. in the third round of the NCAA Division III tournament after already defeating the University of Wisconsin Whitewater and the University of Chicago in the first and second rounds of their tournament. So good luck to all teams that have qualified. Good luck going forward to SLU, to Maryville, and to Wash U. And good luck and congratulations to one specific player, our St. Louis Player of the Week, might as well. It's Jack DiMaria for St. Louis University, who not only scored to send SLU on to the next round in the NCAA tournament, but he scored a brace, one at the 86-minute mark to tie it, and one in double overtime to win it. And if the name Jack DiMaria sounds familiar to you, he did play at the academy level for both St. Louis FC and St. Louis City SC prior to joining SLU this year. So massive, massive excitement and congratulations go out to Jack DiMaria. And we wish all of our St. Louis collegiate schools the best of luck this weekend in their tournaments. And that's it for me on Flyover Footy. Thank you for me so much on this look at the MLS schedule for 2026, the end of season press conference for City, news on MLS leadership going forward, and a special look at our St. Louis collegiate teams. My name is Matt Baker. Enjoy the weekend. If I don't talk to you before then, have a great Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll talk to you later. All right, we are out. Thank you, everyone, for joining. BOFs. Oh, the U.S. Open Cup on Sunday. I forgot to mention that, Jerry. Thank you so much. I saw Tom Franklin, Soccer Zombie, put something out special for that, I believe, on his YouTube. So go check him out for excitement on BOFs as they compete and try to make it further in the U.S. Open Cup. How fun would it be to see a St. Louis City BOFs match in the U.S. Open Cup next season? That would be exciting. But enjoy the weekend. A lot of soccer on tap. St. Louis locally, you can watch SLU on Sunday. So if you make it out to that, I think it'll be cold, but it should be a nice day. So hopefully we make it out for that. Look forward to seeing all of our teams compete and succeed, and look forward to more news from St. Louis. I'll be back.